Welcome to the T2 hubcast. Join T2 and guests as they discuss all things personal and professional development. The T2 hubcast, brought to you by the People Performance People.
Welcome to the T2 hubcast with me, Spencer Locker.
And me, Tracy Roberts.
Morning, Trace.
Morning.
You all right?
I am good. I've had coffee. Can talkie now.
Yeah? Is your mouth 3 inches away from the microphone?
I think so. What do you reckon? You
I
can
reckon,
give
I
me
reckon,
the measurement.
Yeah, although I'm a poor judge of age and distance. So, yeah. Excellent. So, another T2 hubcast. We seem to have not done this in ages. Sorry,
there's a story there.
Yeah, story there. So, interesting chatting at the moment, bouncing ideas around and thoughts around the T2 office with all the consultants and the support staff and all that. A really interesting topic came up, the topic of gaslighting.
Yeah.
So, I thought me and you jump on a podcast, see what we can thrash out here.
Yeah.
So, I mean, fair play. One of the reasons why I think that you and I, we're by no means unique, but one of the reasons
we are a bit unique.
Well, okay, slightly, very, very slightly. We are a little bit unique, but it's mainly to do with the fact that you've experienced gaslighting in a professional capacity, and I've experienced it in a personal capacity.
Yeah.
So why ever not? Let's get chatting about it. So what's your take on this? Because it seems to be one of those things that people has heard about, but very few people understand it. So as soon as you mention gaslighting, it's like, oh yeah, gaslighting. Yeah. Well, what does that mean? Oh, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think it's because it's sort of a reasonably new term, but it actually means things that we've experienced previously we might not have realised were what are classed as gaslighting now. And I suppose other words that you might use are bullying, abuse, sidelining, siloed behaviors, all those sorts of things, and banter even.
Yeah.
That's another one. We'll probably come to that.
Yeah.
And people will have experienced these things, but not really associated them with the true meaning of what gaslighting is, I guess.
Yeah. I think you're right there. And with people hearing the term, but the actual act of gaslighting, I mean, we've got a definition here. Gaslighting in the workplace. Typically, a colleague or a manager invalidates what you know to be true, forcing you to question the facts and ultimately yourself and your ability to do your job. In other words, they're twisting, either accidentally or intentionally, information, words, and behavior to make you feel confused, trivialize feelings, and block you from success.
Well, that doesn't sound very nice, does it?
Well, no, but this is the thing is I mean, when we start talking about like microaggressions, which I suppose it sort of aligns with microaggressions, but not actually a microaggression, because it's quite sort of specific in the sense that you're a victim, but you don't realise it you tend not to realise it until you're a little bit further down the road.
You trivialise it a bit. You sort of think, am I... Initially, for anyone who's in that position, whether it's personally or at work, you would probably question yourself first, which is the whole intention of it, obviously. Yeah. But you would think, am I being a little bit too sensitive? Am I sort of looking at this, what is classed as banter, and taking it a little bit, to heart when I shouldn't be? Or, am I imagining this whole situation and it's just me? Or can I look around the office or in my personal life and see that person's affecting other people? You wouldn't necessarily think, to the fullest extent of the word abuse, you wouldn't think of that, would you? You'd you'd internalize it first and think it's something I've done, which, like I said, is the full intention of the person that's doing it in most cases. Some people do it and don't realize they do it, and that's another story. But yeah.
So what we're really talking about is somebody turning around and calling you out. I mean, there's a number of signs that we can use. Hearing persistent negative accounts of your performance. Usually from the same person. Hearing the gaslighter publicly saying negative things about you. You hear negative, untrue gossip about yourself. You find yourself questioning your perception of reality at work. Obviously, that's that's in the work context.
Yeah.
The gaslighting can be in your personal life as well.
Yeah.
The gaslighter belittles your emotions, efforts, or perceptions, and you're excluded from meetings or events relevant or required for your job.
Oh, we've all been
So
there.
yeah, so it might be
Yeah.
somebody says you didn't send me that report. You didn't email. You didn't send that
Yeah.
email when you know you did. But because this
Mm.
person might have influence, and it's very important to remember this. When somebody's influential, it doesn't necessarily mean that they hold a position of influence. So it might be
Yeah,
that it's a
socially.
manager or a
Yeah.
boss, but it might be an influential other.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Someone who's got
somebody,
that personality
yeah,
in the workplace. Yeah.
certainly. So if somebody's turning around and calling you out on something that you didn't do, usually because somebody turns around to them and says, "Why hasn't this been done?"
Yeah.
They can turn around and say, "Well, you should have sent me that email," and you're sat there going, I did,
Yeah.
but you can't say it.
But again, you'll probably question yourself first
Yeah, certainly.
because we joke about being, like senior moments, so to speak, where you think, oh, why did I walk in this room and did I actually send that email? And if you're quite a diligent person, I think certainly from my own experience, I would chastise myself more because of my personality and obviously my sort of profile. I'm someone who likes to get everything boxed off. I always call it closing the boxes. So I won't go home till the boxes are all closed. If there's a lid slightly open, that makes me uncomfortable. So if someone puts me in a position where I feel like I've not done those things, it really affects me. And I think I wouldn't generally miss the detail. But if I have missed the detail, oh my word, I give myself such a hard time for it. So a gaslighter could have a field day on me, and they have done in the past because they can see my personality. So they use that to their advantage.
Yeah.
So it's not a nice position to be in, that's for sure.
Not a nice position at all. And do you want to sort of elaborate a little bit more on that? Because you sort of alluded to
Yeah.
your experience in the workplace. Do you want to sort of elaborate on that a bit more?
Yeah, so first off, what I would say is, it's taken a long time for me to see it for what it was. But I always think that these situations generally come from, maybe one or two things. So one is jealousy in the workplace. So someone can look at you and see attributes that you've got that, they feel, in their opinion, put them at risk. So, you might have joined a job as an example, and you're really capable, you're probably more capable of them. And at certain things, so they feel that they like to they want to unstabilize you from the beginning. Sometimes it's a disagreement, so you'll have a disagreement with someone and straight away their kind of opinion of you is negative, therefore they want to control that situation again. And it might even be socially, externally or at work, where you're almost the ringleader a little bit without even trying. You're just you're the party goer, you're the person that gets everyone going, and people don't like that. And then there's this other thing of segmentation, which we spoke about, siloed behavior. And sometimes work colleagues, or particularly someone above you, enjoys a situation where you're all separate because you can't have the joined up thinking and they can keep the control. And for me, I've experienced the, from the top down sort of gaslighting, where you're kind of made to question yourself a lot. And I've also experienced it from colleagues as well. If I've come into a new role and if you're full of energy and full of ideas, and people initially, because they're very set in their ways, don't like that, it can turn into gaslighting. So the experience I had initially was, and I didn't see it myself for years, was someone in line above me making me feel constantly like I wasn't doing my job or I wasn't capable of that job. And initially I sort of gave myself a hard time thinking, right, I need to get up to standard, or I need to change my personality, or I need to change my approach. And it was the kind of behaviors where, exactly as you said, I wasn't CC'd in on something and then I was blamed for something later, or I'd be in a meeting and I'd go to talk and I was literally shot down straight away in front of everybody, and there was jokes made about it. Some of it was about my ability. Some of it was about me being female, actually. I'm not going to lie. It was that, that was the degree of separation there was. But it also then spurted out to the rest of the team, because it then became obvious to me after a while that it was happening to the other team members too. So they maybe wouldn't get it to the same extent as me, but they'd be taken to one side and their ego tickled a little bit, but I'm here to support you as the manager, but don't rely on that person because they say this about you. And it went on for quite a long time. And I think what would have been quite transformational is if all of us had actually had a conversation about it. We'd have realized what was going on and actually realized our own truth, which we'll come to. We are very, very good at our jobs, but we'd have been even better if we'd have been collaborating. But for some reason, the person above us didn't like that, because it was almost like creating a superpower as like the Avengers, if you like, because then, if we didn't like what was being said at the top, we'd feel like we had a voice, and that person didn't want that. But it certainly affected me massively. It still affects me today to a degree, because I think we've had the conversation about, how you can have this imposter syndrome sometimes, and it creeps in maybe just when you're not in your best self. And it takes a long time to kind of pull yourself out of it sometimes, doesn't it? So yeah, it was, now that I look back at it, I think I would see the signs now. I think it's maybe because we talk about it more openly.
Yeah.
Back then, someone would have said, oh, you're just accusing someone of, disliking you or it being sexist even, which some of it was. But I'm a tough cookie, you know me. So I'll normally say what's right. But I didn't. So
No.
isn't it strange?
It is because when we start talking about people, with influence, if it's a manager, then you've got to check yourself. It's because it's self-preservation, isn't it? So you think to yourself, if I call this out while I see it, that this might have dire consequences for my job.
Yeah.
But also when we start thinking about people of influence and they're not a manager, you're thinking, well, do I call them out? But the thing is, these people are respected by everybody else.
Yeah.
That's why they're influencers. So they seem to be respected by everybody else. So by calling them out, am I marginalising myself? Am I separating myself away from everybody else? So again, we're looking at position in the organisation.
You need to be smarter with it, because initially, I mentioned this to you, it was a little bit like throwing fuel on the fire, the way I approached it, because of my 8. I want to say it. I would have said it very politely because of my 2, but I would have said, look, I'm not happy with this. I don't agree with what you say. But the more that I approached that in the early days and said, I don't like this, or I feel like, and trying to do it in a direct but personal manner, it almost was like chucking gasoline on the fire. So it became like Mount Etna in the end. Because, that person just did not like that situation. And, what I would advise is there's a different approach to it. And I think if I'd have thought about it back then, I would have realised you can still be brave, but you just have to do it in a different way. And I think because I'm quite emotional internally, not externally, but internally, I try to do it from the business perspective and approach it in that way. But because of the personality of the person that was doing it, it did feel like that. It was like, okay, the more I say, the worse it's going to get. And I think that's what puts a lot of people off calling people out. But there is a better way of dealing with it, I think.
Right. So continuing with the fire analogy,
Yeah.
for all you firefighters out there, we're
remove something from the
fire triangle. Rather than trying to extinguish it with fuel, we're going to remove something from the fire triangle, look at it from a slightly different perspective. Because it's a really interesting thing you say there, because when we start considering our gaslighter, gaslighting is one of the favoured tools in the armory of narcissists.
Yeah.
It's not exclusively used by narcissists, but when we start talking about narcissists and when we start talking about gaslighters, they're charming. They are because this is why. Because if they're not charming, if they're clumsy, if they're a little bit of a blunt object, then you get a little bit of confidence thinking, well, it's just that they're a grumpy sod.
Yeah.
Or blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
But when they're charming, when they're erudite, when they're a bit of a bounder, not Terry Thomas bounder, what a bounder. but yeah, so that's the thing that gets you convinced, because they're clever, because they're very sort of socially, well, I won't say socially excellent, socially clever.
Yeah, they're aware.
They can. That's one of the things that's making you sort of question things. But as we said, with the narcissists particularly, they like to divide and conquer.
Yeah.
They like to keep people in those silos. They like to keep people apart. So they can go up to one group of people and go, them over there, they said this and they did that and blah, 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 blah. And then that can irritate that group. And then they can go over to the other group. And that's the beauty, because you keep all these people separate. As you said, if we'd have got together and talked about this, we'd have been able to probably identify what it was all about. However, because they're clever, they keep you apart. They keep these silos going, and they act like there's some sort of emperor in a gladiatorial coliseum where they can just toy with you. They can play. They can okay. Because again, they don't take you to breaking point, do they? Or they don't push you to breaking point.
No, you're just always on the edge of the cliff, and they're holding onto your belt almost.
Yes. Yeah, and they drop a nice little. What word did you use? Affirmation.
Yeah.
A little affirmation in there to keep you. Because again, if somebody's slagging you down all the time, you're going to get to a point where you're going to want to remove it. But if they sort of spot that point where you're going to remove yourself from a situation and start tempting you back in,
They
holding your
tickle
belt,
your ego just
tickle
enough,
your
don't
ego,
they?
give you a little bit of a rub. Yeah, there you go. Keep you happy. Come back in. Yeah.
Yeah, and so for that reason, it's important to remember there's different ways to approach that situation. So if anyone's listening and they're noticing a little bit of this in what's happened to them and thought, well, yeah, but what can I actually do about it? I think it's really important to remember that, like, the fire with fire thing doesn't always work, and definitely not chucking the fuel on the fire, because like I say, you'll end up with a volcano or a massive eruption. So I think the best way to think about it is to don't question yourself. If you feel a certain way, I always say this, it's your truth. So if it's in you, doesn't matter what someone else thinks, that's how that situation's making you feel, isn't it? So I think the first thing to do is to remember your truth. So, if you've got the confidence in yourself and I do my job well, or I am a nice person at home, or I do these things well, then don't forget that, because ultimately, you've worked hard on that to get yourself to that point. And in a work scenario, you're going to only go on the opinions of the person who can influence your situation. So, of course, you're going to think, well, if my boss doesn't think much of me, then clearly I'm not doing a good job. But that's not always the truth. So what I would say with that is check yourself regularly. Do you feel that the things that you're setting out to do are being achieved? And make sure you're kind of keeping a note of all those things. So I think I mentioned in another conversation we're having about the wins of the week, make sure that you're actually positively affirming your situation every week, but also document things. So if you're having conversations and you're having things asked of you, or you've completed tasks and stuff, make sure you're documenting that. Someone says something you're a bit unsure of, or you hear a side conversation, make a note of it. Now, you might not want to do anything with that after a while, because you might think, right, okay, I've called it out, the situation isn't as bad as I thought it was. But if it starts to get to a point where it's like rolling a snowman, you're collecting and collecting and collecting, then there is a situation there it needs dealing with. But you don't necessarily need to go straight to the source and call the situation out. You need to collect the data and be sure about what approach you want to take. And I think that's the most important thing, is thinking about that and thinking, how can I deal with the situation without having a massive head-to-head? And calling in on help sometimes as well can help, like the situation, another person on the outside, can't it?
We'll take those two things, I think, and put them in our list of top tips for gaslighting.
Yeah.
We'll stick them out.
Know your truth and make the notes.
Yes,
yeah.
I like that. Know your truth. I like that,
Yeah.
definitely. When you're talking about documenting as well, we've had situations where people have actually, rather than writing stuff down, they've actually recorded conversations. Because again, when you've got the gaslighter turning around and saying, "I didn't say that," you've got it recorded. But the thing is, you don't want to fight fire with fire and turn around and saying, "I'm recording this conversation for the purposes of gathering evidence," blah. But you can turn around and say, "You know what? You know how forgetful I am. You keep telling me how forgetful I am. You keep telling me I never do this. So just to help me out, can I record this? Or I'm going to record
and
this."
if they don't like it, then you'll see the change in their body, their body language, won't you? And that'll tell you all you need to know. And I think it's quite commonplace now that people record stuff. I do it to myself. I make little voice notes to myself sometimes, particularly if I'm in a crazy place, like in the car and I have an idea. So I don't think it's, uncommon. But the other thing is just take notes, or, you don't need to orchestrate it so it looks like you've got, a member of the union with you, but you can have someone there with you that you can bring in as an advisor to sort of be involved in that conversation, take the notes, repeat it back to, what's been agreed and all those things. Or even better, if you think that perpetrator, that gaslighter, maybe doesn't even realize they're doing it, because you will get a situation like that from time to time, then say, great, I'm really glad we've had this conversation, I've made my own notes, but do me a favor, can you put that all in bullet point form with a little bit more detail, send it to me, because you know what I'm like, I'm probably going to forget some of those things. And if you want to, pick the top 3 that you want me to work on next week, because quite often you're set up to fail, aren't you? So they'll say they've said something and they haven't, or they'll give you a list of 27 million things to do, knowing you can do 2 of those in the time you've been given. And that then amounts to seagull management, but we're going to come to that later. So find a way of almost calling them out without calling them out.
And I think by demonstrating this confidence and this strength of confidence, this is probably going to influence the gaslighter into thinking, right, maybe this isn't the person I need to gaslight. Because if you've got T's crossed, I's dotted, everything nailed down, belt and braces. There's very, very little. And again, gathering evidence, doing recordings, getting independent witnesses and things like that, it minimises their chance of being able to exploit you. And if you're confident, you're going to be less typical. It's going to be typically less for you to doubt yourself.
Yeah, because doubt's the worst thing, isn't it? I think for a lot of people, psychological safety is a big thing.
Yes.
And they won't realise that terminology perhaps, but it is about, when you walk into work, do you feel safe that you can say what you want to say? And, the people around you. Now, don't get me wrong, you're not going to walk into every workplace and say, do you know what? I like everybody. I always say there's people you work with and you have a coffee with at work, and there's people that you'll go out and you'll go, do you know what? I'd go for a pint with them afterwards, and there's always going to be that divide, isn't there? So you're not ever going to get it perfect. We're quite lucky here, but in big workplaces, it's difficult, isn't it? So I think as long as you can find that balance of psychological safety, but I guess that takes it into the next stage. So we've been talking predominantly more about bosses there and, that kind of hierarchy and, looking for support. But if it's in the middle ranks or even below you trying to undermine you, it can be a little bit more difficult, can't it?
Yeah. Did you say that you make little voice notes to yourself?
Yeah.
Okay. No, nothing wrong with it. I can't do
amazing.
that.
You are going to do amazing things today.
I can't do that because I think I sound like Cary Grant. But when I actually listen to it back, I sound like someone off Last of the Summer Wine.
Yeah, no, I think sometimes I'll tell you the reason why. I think I realised in one of the cars I had that I could press a button and it would do it for me on my phone because I had a connection. So when I was driving along and I had like a 4-hour drive to go to a meeting or something, sometimes I just have these amazing ideas and I'm very, very, I wouldn't answer like a text message every time I'm driving. So I used to have it all connected. So it was an easy way for me to go, right, instead of writing a note or stopping and writing notes, I'll just make myself a voice note.
Yeah.
And sometimes I do have a laugh back to myself because I will say, do remember today to Tracy to not be a twat to everybody, But I think it works for me. And sometimes it'll be just I've come out of a situation and I can be a bit like feet first because I see it as it is. I have to be really conscious and pull it back a bit. I think pick your moments. So I then will come out of the meeting and I'll either make a note or a voice note saying, remember to go back and have a chat to that person. Not about not dealing with the situation, but it might be just the wrong time for something.
Yeah.
And, as an 8, that we can be quite, that's quite a common trait of a number 8 because we just want to get it done. So yeah, it helps. Definitely.
That's reminded me of something. Do you know what the secret of comedy is?
Go on.
Timing.
Like it.
Right, yeah. So we've talked about the gaslighter. We sort of start putting a bit of a picture in our brain as to not necessarily what they look like, but how they act, how they respond and react, how they treat people, how they communicate with people, how they make people feel.
Yeah.
So let's sort of consider now that might be a typical gaslighter, but when we start talking about gaslightees, because you mentioned earlier on that you're an 8. When we start talking about unconscious motivators, you're strong and self-reliant.
Yeah.
And this does sort of transpire into sort of being forthright, unambiguous,
yes.
and quite sort of people love that lack of ambiguity. They like straight talking and things like that. So one of the traits of an 8 tends to be the capability of actually saying it, what needs to be said.
Yeah.
However, you're also very mindful of the situation you were in and the consequences of what potential consequences if you had called it out. Yeah. So you didn't.
No, but interestingly enough, this actually backs up a lot of the things we say, particularly about our print numbers, because I'm a 8 high and a 2 high.
All right.
So my 2 is the whole humanistic side of things and caring about, to a degree what people think. And it can actually be a little bit of a war between an 8 and a 2, can't it? So I think that, I would have thought to myself, questioned myself first because I'm a deep thinker, but I would have also thought about how that might affect the team, as a whole, if I sort of drop the grenade in the office and say, right, I'm not happy about that situation. So, but I do think that, there's not someone who's more susceptible than others, in my opinion, because if me as the most strong and self-reliant person in that group, was affected, then essentially it's more about the situation than the actual person, isn't it? So if someone's new to a business, you could say they might be more susceptible, but you could equally say that actually because they've got a different lens on, they might not be. They might actually see it for what it is and call it out straight away. It could be someone who's set in their ways at work. They're very, no growth mindset there, just doing the thing. And people think, right, I don't like that. This company's going somewhere, I'm going to break them down, if you like. So I don't think there's anything that's kind of like that stands out. Like you say, it's a little bit like the gaslighter. Would they have a certain hat on? Absolutely not. I think everybody's different, and I actually think there is some truth in the fact that lots of people won't have realized they've done the gaslighting themselves, because all it takes is for you to come in on a bad day and be in shadow and say, someone's left their cup on the desk, right? Something really pathetic. And you make a throwaway comment to 3-4 people in that office about that person. And it then escalates to, and he left his plate there yesterday. And this is just a stupid situation, but it escalates into that little bubble of, basically calling him out in front of a group of people. And before you know it, there's something else he's done that day, and it's become a little bit of a witch's cauldron, and whatever way you look at it, that will then affect the conversation afterwards with that individual or that situation. So it's not necessarily, right, I'm going to stop that person getting, the promotion he deserves, or it can be very, very silly situations that just, as soon as that person walks back in the office, they're going to feel a shift in the atmosphere, aren't they? So you don't even try to gaslight there, but you did it.
Yeah.
And it's not about having a squawk, because you can have a squawk from time to time.
Yes.
But have a squawk at the person.
Yeah.
Don't just have a squawk at everyone else.
Cool. All right. So with 4 minutes to go,
I
think we ought to sort of take some of the stuff that we've been talking about and sort of assemble a sort of top 5 tips or a top 4 tips or whatever. T2 tips. We won't number them. We'll give T2 tips for gaslighting or dealing with gaslighters, because that's another thing as well. Just flicking back to a conversation we had. We've been on the internet where people are encouraging it.
Oh my word, yeah. If you want to get one over your colleague, here's your top 5 tips for basically messing them about.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe that. I literally nearly fell off my chair when I saw that. It's like a professional development course. And I think, oh my word. But yeah, I mean, I can see where people's brain might go if they're one of the kind of people who are like, by any means possible, I will get this.
Yeah.
So if they've got no humanistic traits.
It's a bit like sort of sitting back and going, right, I want to be a successful business person. I know, I'll watch The Apprentice and learn from that.
Oh,
no, you won't.
My word. You'll learn what not to do on that, won't you? Yeah.
So, so one of the things that you said earlier on was document and recording evidence.
Yeah.
So even the
down.
littlest bits and pieces, just, so making sure that you've got it down, whether it's recorded or whether it's written down.
Yeah.
It might be that you might have to be a little bit surreptitious. So if you're receiving emails, because you can turn around to the gaslighter and say, all those things, can you put it? Can you send it to me in email?
Yeah.
They might deny it later on, but if you've put it in a folder, or if you've BCC'd it onto somebody else, an independent person, then they can call you out and say, I never said that to you. You can turn around and go, well, they've got their email as well.
Absolutely. You might not even have to use the data, because you might gather data and actually realize it isn't what it is, and you can deal with the situation. But either way, I don't think it's a bad thing. I've always had that, protect your own backside, basically.
Yeah. One that I thought of, be direct if you can. If you can't, be indirect. So bearing in mind, we're not saying that all these amiable people out there, they're not going to call people out about things, because they're amiable people. You've got to be authentic, haven't you?
Yeah.
So if it is your boss, talk to your co-workers.
Yeah.
If it's your co-workers, talk to your boss.
Yeah. Find something that works to sort of get a second opinion without stirring the pot, basically.
Yeah. And you've got to, again, trust. When we start talking about psychological safety, God, that was difficult for me to say. Psychological safety is establishing trust.
Yeah.
And making sure that just because not everybody's a gaslighter, not everybody's out to get you. Don't have nightmare kids. Don't be locking yourself in the office and drawing the blinds. It's not.
We're
everybody.
all under our desks most days.
But there's people out there who might see it the same. And if
Yeah.
you can collaborate with people, break down those
Yeah.
silos and talk to people and listen to what they've got to say, you might find that you're not the only one.
Yeah, sometimes it's just breaking through and having a conversation with someone else you think might be in that bubble, because they're probably feeling the same as you, aren't they?
Yeah.
So rather than going in there, like I say, stirring the cauldron, just have a very direct conversation in a very friendly manner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent. So now, with a matter of seconds left on the clock, good. Happy with that.
Yeah. Good
Good old
chat.
Thanks, Tracy. Really enjoyed that.
You're welcome.
We'll
Thank
be
you.
back very soon with another T2 Hubcast. So until then, bye-bye.